Tokyo, March 9, 1945. A warm night turned into a furnace. The wind carried flames faster than people could run. Children hid under tatami mats that turned to ash before they could scream. In the distance, the steady hum of engines, B-29 superfortresses, stitched the darkness with lines of glowing fire. And above it all, one man watched a red dot on a map and nodded. Curtis E. LeMay was not insane. He was methodical. He believed in results, and fire delivered results. "Killing Japanese didn't bother me very much," he once said. "It was getting the job done that counted." His voice was flat, factual. The kind of tone you hear from a man describing weather conditions, not moral consequences. They called it Operation Meeting House, but historians remember it as the night Tokyo burned. More than 100,000 dead, a city of wood turned to cinders, and a new chapter in the playbook of modern destruction. The raid worked so well that LeMay redefined the future of war. If one city could be erased overnight, then victory itself could be manufactured, one firestorm at a time. 2 decades later, when asked about using similar tactics against North Vietnam, he uttered the line that would outlive him, open quote, "We can bomb them back into the Stone Age," close quote. To some, it was the ultimate threat. Cold, brutal, honest. To others, it was a confession that America's air power had become a theology and LeMay its high priest. But behind that steel facade, behind the smoke and certainty, lies a deeper question. What happens when a nation builds its morality on the efficiency of destruction? Because for Curtis LeMay, war wasn't chaos. It was order, measured in tonnage, in altitude, in the number of cities that could vanish before breakfast. And that perhaps is the curse of a man who saw the apocalypse not as horror, but as a checklist. Before the firestorms, before the myth, Curtis Emerson LeMay was just a boy from Columbus, Ohio, son of a coal miner, raised in a house where pragmatism was survival. He was not poetic nor sentimental. He loved machines, equations, and order. While other children dreamed of adventure, LeMay dreamed of control. By the time he entered the U.S. Army Air Corps, aviation was still an art of daredevils, unpredictable, glamorous, occasionally suicidal. LeMay turned it into a science. At flight school, he obsessed over aerodynamics and fuel efficiency. As a young officer, he devised navigation systems that allowed bomber formations to fly through weather so thick pilots couldn't see their own wings. He didn't just fly missions, he engineered them. Then came World War II, and with it, the perfect stage for a man like him. The Allies needed someone who could turn chaos into precision, and LeMay delivered. He commanded B-17 groups over Europe, designing bombing patterns so tight that German cities disappeared from reconnaissance maps. Success came with a price, the first seeds of moral blindness. Each victory was measured in tonnage dropped, not lives lost. In 1944, he was transferred to the Pacific. Japan was different. Wooden cities, narrow streets, a culture that would fight to the death, or so American intelligence insisted. Precision bombing had failed. The weather, the winds, the geography all conspired against accuracy. LeMay studied the problem like a math equation and found his brutal solution: low-altitude incendiary raids using napalm and magnesium. If the enemy hid among civilians, he reasoned, then the city itself was the target. When the first firebombs fell on Tokyo, the results were beyond anything his charts could predict. Entire districts vaporized in minutes. Rivers boiled. Civilians melted into black silhouettes against walls. And yet, LeMay's after-action report was cold, clean, bureaucratic. Mission efficiency exceeded expectations. To Washington, he was a genius. To his men, he was terrifyingly calm, the kind of commander who would light a cigarette while a city burned below. And so, by the war's end, Curtis LeMay had become the embodiment of America's new belief: that technology could substitute for morality, that total destruction could be justified by total victory. He had built a formula, and soon he would apply it again. This time, not with napalm, but with nuclear fire. It began at 12:08 a.m. on March 10, 1945. The first wave of B-29s came in low, just 1,500 feet above the sleeping city, so low that their propellers churned up the smoke from the previous bombers. They weren't carrying explosives this time, but 1,665 tons of M69 incendiary bombs, small cylinders packed with jellied gasoline that clung to skin, wood, and air. The bombs fell in clusters, tumbling through the darkness like glowing seeds. LeMay had stripped the aircraft of defensive guns to make room for more fuel and more fire. "You'll have less weight and more destruction," he told his crews. His strategy was radical, almost suicidal, flying slow, heavy, and low through enemy flak. Yet he calculated it would save time, save bombs, and ironically, save lives by ending the war sooner. What followed was not war. It was a weather event, a firestorm, the most efficient combustion of human life ever engineered. The temperature rose past 1,800 degrees Fahrenheit. Entire neighborhoods ignited simultaneously, merging into a single roaring vortex that sucked oxygen from the streets. People who tried to flee toward the Sumida River found it boiling. Mothers held children who had already turned to ash. From the sky, Tokyo looked like a living organism, veins of fire twisting through its body, then collapsing inward. Crews in the bombers felt the heat through their flight suits, even at 1,500 feet. Some vomited. Others cheered. And LeMay, back at Guam headquarters, marked another red X on the mission board. By dawn, 16 square miles of Tokyo were gone. An estimated 100,000 civilians had been killed, more than Hiroshima, more than Nagasaki. In one night, Curtis LeMay had proven his theory that fire could end wars faster than diplomacy. When reporters later asked him about the raid, he didn't flinch. Open quote, "If we'd lost the war," he said, "we'd all have been prosecuted as war criminals." Close quote. It was not a confession. It was a calculation, a reminder that history is written by the side that burns slower. The firebombing of Tokyo became the blueprint for modern air power: saturation, speed, psychological collapse. It also became the invisible scar on the American conscience, the unspoken proof that victory and atrocity can share the same coordinates on a map. And as the smoke cleared, LeMay's mind was already elsewhere, on how to build a system that could repeat this destruction automatically, globally, and permanently. That system would have a name: the Strategic Air Command. When the war ended, most men went home. Curtis LeMay went to work. In 1948, he took command of a new creation, the Strategic Air Command, SAC, a force designed not just to fight wars, but to end civilizations. At its heart were long-range bombers loaded with atomic weapons, standing by 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. LeMay shaped it into something beyond a military branch. It was a cult of readiness, a machine of permanent apocalypse. He drilled his crews like monks of annihilation. Bombers had to launch within 15 minutes of an alert. Pilots practiced minimum interval takeoffs, roaring down runways just seconds apart, because in the nuclear age, hesitation meant extinction. The slogan was simple, almost poetic in its absurdity: "Peace is our profession." Inside the hardened bunkers of Omaha, LeMay built a command network that stretched across the world. At his peak, he controlled over 1,000 nuclear bombers, 600,000 personnel, and the faith of an entire generation of strategists who believed that survival depended on the threat of instant, total death. He taught America to think in megatons. He also taught it to stop thinking about consequences. LeMay's philosophy was brutally linear. If deterrence fails, destroy them first. He was the original voice of the First Strike Doctrine, a policy so extreme that even President Kennedy reportedly called him the most dangerous man in America. During the Cuban Missile Crisis, LeMay urged Kennedy to bomb Soviet missile sites immediately, mocking diplomacy as weakness. "We're going to be in a damn war anyway," he snapped. "Let's get it over with." For LeMay, restraint was just another word for delay. He saw nuclear weapons not as taboo, but as tools, cleaner, faster, more efficient than firebombs. He didn't lose sleep over moral lines. He erased them. "If you're going to kill the enemy," he once said, "you better be prepared to kill him completely." Under his command, SAC became a living paradox, a system built to prevent war by rehearsing it every day. The Cold War, for LeMay, wasn't about politics. It was logistics. If every bomber could reach Moscow in 8 hours, peace would hold. That was his calculus: terror as equilibrium, destruction as order. But beneath the precision and pride, something darker was taking shape. A doctrine where efficiency replaced ethics, and annihilation became routine. America's skies filled with aircraft that never landed, loaded with death waiting for a signal that, by design, might never come. In the process, LeMay transformed from a wartime hero into the symbol of a new morality, one measured not by what was right, but by what could be vaporized. He had conquered war, but in doing so, he may have also conquered humanity's ability to feel remorse. Curtis LeMay never apologized for anything. To him, morality was a luxury for men who lost wars. His battlefield was the sky, vast, cold, and mathematical. Down below were targets, not people. "You've got to kill people," he once said, "and when you've killed enough of them, they stop fighting." It was a philosophy so brutally honest that it terrified even his allies. In an age when politicians wrapped war in euphemism, LeMay stripped it naked. No surgical strikes, no collateral damage, just raw arithmetic. Enemy capacity versus destruction required. That clarity made him both indispensable and obscene. LeMay's ideology thrived in the post-war boom, when America's industrial might and atomic arsenal merged into a single moral logic. If you have the power to destroy, it is immoral not to use it. This was the theology of deterrence, a faith he preached with the zeal of a man who had already seen hell and found it efficient. But there were cracks in the doctrine. During the Korean War, LeMay ordered saturation bombings that leveled nearly every major city in North Korea. By his own admission, "We burned down just about every town, and yet victory never came." In Vietnam, his calls to bomb them back into the Stone Age became the slogan of frustration, the cry of a military mind fighting a political war it couldn't win. The results were predictable. The jungles burned. Villages vanished. The will of the enemy did not. The world watched America unleash the sky again and recoil. In Washington, LeMay's bluntness became a liability. He mocked diplomacy, despised gradualism, and dismissed public outrage as weakness. When President Johnson sought limited bombing to avoid escalation, LeMay sneered, "You can't fight a war with one hand tied behind your back." To him, restraint was the disease that killed empires. But somewhere between Hiroshima and Hanoi, the old equations stopped working. Bomb tonnage no longer equaled victory. Technology had outpaced morality, and LeMay's war machine had outpaced reason itself. The irony was cruel. The man who believed in control had built a system that could destroy everything, including the people operating it. The SAC's alert status led to dozens of near misses, false alarms, and accidents that could have erased entire nations in minutes. The logic of deterrence had become a sword balanced on a heartbeat. LeMay saw it as strength. Others saw it as madness, dressed in a uniform. And as the moral debate over civilian bombing deepened, from Tokyo to Pyongyang to Hanoi, historians, philosophers, and soldiers all circled the same question he never answered. Is there such a thing as ethical efficiency in killing? For LeMay, it didn't matter. The mission was always clear. The bomb bay doors were always open. By the late 1960s, the sky that had once obeyed Curtis LeMay began to drift beyond his command. Technology had evolved. Satellites, missiles, computers, and the bomber fleets he once ruled were slowly becoming relics of his own doctrine. But LeMay himself didn't evolve. He dug in, harder, louder, angrier. He retired from the Air Force in 1965, but not quietly. His farewell speech was less an exit and more a warning, a lament that America had gone soft, that politicians had betrayed the iron logic of victory. "We're fighting wars we don't intend to win," he barked, his jaw still locked in that permanent scowl that made even presidents nervous. Yet history was moving on without him. The firestorms of Tokyo had become case studies in moral philosophy. The bombers of SAC were replaced by ICBMs buried under the plains of North Dakota. The apocalypse no longer needed pilots, it just needed a code and a button. Still, LeMay couldn't let go. In 1968, he reappeared. Not in uniform, but in politics. George Wallace, the segregationist governor of Alabama, invited him to run as his vice presidential candidate. It was an unholy alliance, a Southern populist and the godfather of strategic annihilation. LeMay's presence was meant to project strength, but instead it terrified voters. When he spoke casually about using nuclear weapons in Vietnam, even Wallace flinched. The campaign sank under its own madness. After that, LeMay vanished into quiet obscurity, retired to a ranch surrounded by trophies, medals, and the ghosts of the cities he'd erased. He wrote an autobiography that read more like a manual than a confession. He never admitted regret. Not once. He claimed history had misunderstood him, that he was only ever trying to shorten wars, to save lives by ending them faster. But the numbers never agreed. The cities never agreed. By the time he died in 1990, America had built entire museums around the weapons he pioneered. War memorials filled with polished bomb casings and silent footage of mushroom clouds. His legacy had become a paradox. The man who kept the peace by preparing for the end of the world. Even now, his fingerprints remain on the logic of modern warfare. The drones, the precision strikes, the collateral damage reports, all are echoes of LeMay's dream, war reduced to engineering. Humanity outsourced to machinery, and yet buried beneath that machinery is a question that refuses to die. Can a man be both protector and destroyer, savior and executioner, and still be human? LeMay never answered. He didn't believe in questions, only results. History remembers generals by the wars they win. Curtis LeMay is remembered by the ones he could have ended forever. His name still hangs like the echo of a siren. The man who built peace out of fear, who measured morality in megatons, who believed that survival required the readiness to destroy everything. In his own way, he succeeded. The United States and the Soviet Union never fired their nuclear weapons at each other. Deterrence held. Civilization survived. But survival is not the same as sanity. LeMay's world was one of absolutes, victory or annihilation, discipline or disaster. And in that rigid geometry, the human cost disappeared. When war becomes an equation, mercy is just an error term. What began as strategy evolved into ideology, the worship of control, the seduction of total certainty. That's the real legacy of Curtis LeMay. Not just the firebombed cities or the nuclear doctrine, but the way of thinking that still lingers in military and political minds today. That every threat can be bombed into silence, that technology can solve morality, that peace can be engineered through terror. Look closely at modern warfare, at drone footage flickering across command screens, at the sterile language of surgical strikes. The tools are different, but the logic is the same. We still draw lines on maps. We still measure success by the absence of resistance, not by the presence of justice. LeMay didn't invent that logic. He simply perfected it. In the end, his greatest enemy wasn't Japan or Russia or even Vietnam. It was time, the slow realization that no empire can bomb its way to moral clarity. His firestorms may have won battles, but they also scorched the very idea of humanity's limits. There's a haunting symmetry in that. The man who wanted to bomb them back into the Stone Age became a symbol of our own regression, proof that progress without conscience is just a more efficient form of barbarism. Curtis LeMay died believing he had protected civilization. But the question his life leaves behind burns hotter than any city he ever set aflame. If destruction is the price of peace, then what exactly is it we're trying to save?